Picture this. A quiet evening, the aroma of simmering tomato sauce filling the air, when the phone shrieks and shatters the calm. That's how it started for me. Emily Carter, a 35-year-old marketing whiz who'd rather pitch ad campaigns than pitch hay. The voice on the line was clipped professional and dropped a bombshell. Ms. Carter, I regret to inform you that your Uncle James has passed away. My wooden spoon clattered to the floor, splattering sauce across my pristine white kitchen tiles like a crime scene. Uncle James, my last head of the family, had left me his entire estate, including a sprawling 20-acre farm just outside Willow Creek. Me, a city girl who couldn't keep a cactus alive, now owned farmland? The next day, I stood on that property, boots sinking into the earth, staring at a weathered red barn that looked like it belonged in a postcard. Endless fields stretched out, whispering secrets of a life I'd never known. The lawyer, a wiry man named Mr. Grayson, handed me a thick folder. James turned down every offer to sell, he said, his voice tinged with respect, even when they built Oakwood Estates right next door. Oakwood Estates, where I bought my townhouse last year. The irony hit me like a slap. As I pored over deeds, water rights, and boundary maps that night, the silhouette of my barn against the starlit sky felt less like a burden and more like a mystery begging to be unraveled. Little did I know, that mystery was about to explode into a fight for everything I didn't even realize I wanted. So there I was, still reeling from inheriting Uncle James's farm, when my doorbell jolted me awake at 7:30 a.m. I stumbled to the door in my pajamas, hair a mess, and found a woman with silver hair so perfect it could have been sculpted, flanked by 3 suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a boardroom drama. "Emily Carter?" she said, her smile tight as a drum. "I'm Victoria Langston, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. May we come in?" Before I could blink, they'd swept into my living room like they owned it. Victoria perched on my couch like it might bite her, while one of the men, introduced as Councilman Gerald Brooks, slid a document across my coffee table. "We understand you've inherited James Carter's property," Victoria began, flipping open a leather portfolio. "We'd like to offer you $750,000 for the full 20 acres. I nearly spat out my coffee. That was peanuts, half what the land was worth. "Easy. It's been sitting idle for years," she pressed, her tone dripping with fake generosity. "We're doing you a favor." Something about her smugness made my skin crawl. I've dealt with enough sleazy execs to spot a power play. "I need time to think," I said, keeping my voice steady. Victoria smiled and budged, but her eyes turned to ice. "We don't have time, Emily. The Oakwood Regional Airport project starts next week." "Airport?" My brain screeched to a halt. "What airport?" I demanded. She waved a hand like I was a kid asking dumb questions. "The board voted last month. Your uncle's farm is the last piece we need for the runway extension." A plane roared overhead, way too low, as at the punctuator point. "That's my land." I snapped. "You can't just take it." She handed me a blue folder, her smile now a smirk. "Check your HOA agreement, Section 47B. All adjoining properties fall under our jurisdiction for community projects. Our final offer expires tomorrow noon. Be smart, Emily." They left me standing there, folder in hand, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I called in sick and drove to the farm, heart pounding. Construction crews were already there, bulldozers lined up, workers in yellow vests stabbing survey stakes into my fields. I parked and stormed over, waving my arms like a lunatic. "Hey, what are you doing?" A worker glanced up, confused. "This is private property." I yelled, yanking a stake out of the ground. He flashed a digital permit on his phone, signed by the town council and HOA yesterday. Yesterday, before they even made me an offer. "Get off my land." I shouted, clutching the stake like a spear. A supervisor jogged over, all apologies. "Ms. Carter, I presume?" "I'm Tom Riley, project foreman. We've got authorizations. Talk to the HOA or council if you've got issues." He looked genuinely sorry, but that didn't stop the dread pooling in my gut. I spent the day on the phone, chasing answers. The town clerk sounded sympathetic, but said the permits checked out. The county commissioner ghosted me. The one lawyer I reached quoted a fee that had drained my savings. By evening, I was slumped at my kitchen table, surrounded by Uncle James's papers, defeated. How could they do this? How was it legal? Then a knock at my back door made me jump. Through the glass, I saw an older guy with gray hair and eyebrows like caterpillars. My neighbor, Henry Miles, from 2 doors down. "Ms. Carter," he said as I cracked the door, "I saw what went down at your farm today." I sighed. "You mean me yelling like a fool?" He shook his head. "No, you standing up to Victoria Langston's bulldozers. Can I come in? You need a friend." Henry stepped inside, and I could feel the story shifting. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about to get bigger, messier, and a whole lot more dangerous. Henry Miles wasn't just my nosy neighbor with the pristine lawn. He was a retired judge who'd been watching Victoria Langston's schemes for years. As I brewed coffee, he settled at my table, peering at Uncle James's papers through bifocals. "She runs the HOA like her own fiefdom," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Her husband, Richard Langston, owns half the commercial real estate in Willow Creek. Her son-in-law's construction firm magically wins every bid." I frowned, still processing. "An airport, though? That's insane." Henry's eyes glinted. "It's not about planes, Emily. It's about cash. Rezone that land for commercial use, and its value skyrockets. Noise tanks home prices nearby, and the Langstons buy cheap." I shoved my hair back, overwhelmed. What can I do? I can't afford a legal war. Henry grinned, flipping through the HOA agreement Victoria had left. "Every strategy's got a weak spot. We just need hers." We dug in, poring over documents past midnight. I was ready to call it quits when Henry yanked out an old survey from James's files. "Emily, look." His voice crackled with excitement. "The property line's off. It doesn't match the county's current records." I leaned over, bleary-eyed. "What's that mean?" "It means," he said, eyes twinkling, "we checked the original deed against the HOA's incorporation papers. 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee later, we hit gold. When James bought the farm in 1978, the previous owner had joined the fledgling HOA. But in 1995, when they expanded their jurisdiction, James never signed the updated agreement. "The HOA has no power over your land," Henry whispered, hand shaking. "Victoria's whole project's built on a lie." I stared at him, hope flickering. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Victoria bribed the county inspector. Airport's not FAA safe. I've got proof. Old Mill, noon. Come alone. David." "Who's David?" I asked, heart racing. Henry's face darkened. "Victoria's old assistant. Fired last month for asking too many questions. If he's reaching out, this is bigger than we thought." The next day, I pulled into the Old Mills lot, palms sweaty on the wheel. Was this a trap? The weathered building loomed, its wooden walls sagging like a tired old man. I gripped my keys and pushed open the creaking door. Dust swirled in the sunlight, streaming through broken windows. "Hello," I called. A shadow shifted, and a thin, nervous guy stepped forward. David Pierce, ex-assistant, with darting eyes and rumpled clothes. "Ms. Carter," he whispered. "Thanks for coming." I stayed near the door. "You said you got proof?" He glanced out the window, then handed me a USB drive with trembling fingers. "I worked for Victoria 3 years. Handled all the airport paperwork. It's not an airport. It's a private cargo hub for Richard Langston's shipping company. The environmental study's fake. They bribed inspectors. The runway breaks half a dozen FAA rules." My mind spun. If this is true, it's not just shady, it's illegal. David nodded, pulling out more papers. "Victoria's got the council in her pocket. Emails here show her and Gerald Brooks splitting profits from cheap land grabs." I narrowed my eyes. "Why tell me?" He looked down, voice breaking. "I helped at first. Fudge dates, tweaked minutes. Then I learned they're draining wetlands on your land. Endangered frogs live there. My kid's obsessed with them. She's 8, wants to be a biologist. How do I face her if I let that happen?" His honesty hit me hard. I pocketed the USB. "What now?" Emergency HOA meeting tonight, he said. Victoria's pushing the timeline. She doesn't know about James's unsigned agreement. I drove home, adrenaline pumping, and found Henry waiting with more firepower. His daughter, Laura Miles, an environmental lawyer from the city. We've got 2 angles for an injunction, she said, spreading papers across my table. 1, the HOA has no jurisdiction. 2, they're hiding the wetland threat. I looked at them. Strangers turned allies overnight. Why help me? Henry's gaze was steel. Victoria's bullied this town for decades. Someone's got to stop her. As evening loomed, we hatched a plan. I'd hit the HOA meeting with James's deed, while Laura filed the injunction tomorrow. The fight was on, and I was ready to swing. The old mill smelled like dust and secrets as I stood there, clutching David's USB drive. He'd just blown the lid off Victoria Langston's airport lie. It wasn't for commuters, but a private cargo terminal for her husband Richard's shipping empire. These are emails, blueprints, bank records, David said, his voice a nervous rasp. They need your land for the runway. Your uncle's pond makes the geography perfect. I flipped through the folder, stomach dropping. Why the rush? Why not just buy it fair? He pulled out his phone, showing an email. Their rival's building a hub 50 miles away. First one done gets an exclusive government contract. Time's money. I snapped photos of everything. Pulse racing. Thanks, David. Why risk this? His face twisted. Victoria fired me after 10 years. Called me disloyal for questioning the environmental report. Then blackballed me in town. This is payback. The mill door banged open and we froze. Tom Riley, the construction foreman, stepped in. David, your car's outside. What's this? David stammered, just grabbing old records. Tom's eyes narrowed. He wasn't buying it. Victoria's called an emergency HOA meeting tonight. You both should be there. He left, and I exhaled. David whispered, be careful. They're desperate. That night, the community center buzzed like a beehive on fire. 50 neighbors packed the room, some curious, some annoyed. Victoria stood at the podium in a crisp navy suit, flanked by Gerald Brooks and Tom. The Oakwood Regional Airport enters its final phase tomorrow, she announced, clicking to a slick rendering of a terminal. It'll boost property values along the access road by 20%. I can hold back. What about homes near the runway, with cargo planes all night? Every head swiveled to me. Victoria's smile tightened. Ms. Carter, glad you're here. I hear you rejected our generous offer. I rejected it because it's not yours to take. I shot back, standing. My farm's not under HOA jurisdiction. Never has been. The room went dead quiet. Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced. Nonsense. It's in our records. I slapped James's original deed on the table. He never signed your 1995 agreement. The old owner did, but it didn't transfer without his signature. I pulled out my phone, flashing David's cargo hub plans. And this isn't a public airport. It's a 24/7 shipping terminal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mr. Jenkins, who nagged me about my mailbox, leapt up. You said small commuter flights, not a cargo nightmare. Mrs. Patel, whose wind chimes haunted my sleep, chimed in. Where's the environmental study? My grandkids play in that creek. Victoria's face reddened. This meeting's adjourned, she barked, slamming her gavel. But the room erupted, neighbors demanding answers, shouting for financials. She signaled her cronies and bolted as chaos reigned. I felt a tap, Tom looking uneasy. Their start construction at dawn, permits or not. I pushed through the crowd to catch Victoria, but her SUV peeled out of the lot. Henry caught me outside. You kicked a hornet's nest, Emily. I had to tell the truth, I said. Truth won't stop bulldozers, he warned. Victoria's got friends in high places. I drove home, mind spinning. A dark car peeled away as I turned onto my street. Someone watching? Inside, I locked every door and called Laura. She promised to file the injunction at dawn. I crashed into bed, but midnight brought a crash, glass shattering downstairs. Heart hammering, I crept down. My living room window was smashed, a brick on the carpet wrapped with a note. Sell now or regret it. Shadows fled across my lawn as I dialed the cops. Officer Daniels showed up, jotting notes like it was a chore. Probably kids, he said, eyeing the threat. Kids own the man I sell. I snapped. He shrugged. No witnesses, no proof. My phone pinged. A text from David. They're hitting the farm at dawn. Bring help. Red and blue lights flashed as I packed a bag. This wasn't a game anymore. It was war. And I needed an army. The community center was a pressure cooker that night. The air thick with tension and the hum of 50 neighbors crammed into folding chairs. I'd spent the day with Henry and Laura, prepping for this showdown. James's unsigned deed burning a hole in my bag. Victoria Langston stood at the podium, all polished navy suit and fake smiles, flanked by Councilman Gerald Brooks and Tom Riley. She clicked through slides of a gleaming airport terminal, like she was selling a dream. As you know, she began, voice smooth as silk. The Oakwood Regional Airport project kicks into high gear tomorrow. We'll clear the old Carter property at dawn. This will put Willow Creek on the map. Homes near the main road could see a 20% value bump. I couldn't sit on it anymore. What about the homes by the runway? I called out, my voice cutting through her spiel. The ones with cargo planes roaring overhead day and night. What happens to their value? Every head in the room snapped toward me. Victoria's smile hardened, like a mask about crack. Ms. Carter, how nice of you to join us. I understand you turned down our very fair offer. I turned it down because it's not yours to claim, I said, standing up, feeling the weight of every eye on me. My uncle's farm isn't under HOA jurisdiction, and it never has been. The silence was deafening. Victoria let out a laugh, sharp and dismissive. That's absurd. Your property's listed in our records. I pulled out James's deed, holding it up like a shield. He never signed your 1995 expanded jurisdiction agreement. The previous owner did, but that didn't carry over when James bought the place. The HOA has no legal right to take my land for anything, especially not an airport that breaks FAA safety rules. I handed copies to the folks nearby, Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Patel, people I barely knew but who were now part of this mess. The room buzzed as they passed the papers around. Gerald Brooks stepped forward, his face flushed like he'd just run a mile. These are wild accusations, Miss Carter. Where'd you get this so-called evidence? County Recorder's Office. I said, coolly. Public records. Open to anyone with the guts to look. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping in a chaotic stew of confusion and anger. Mr. Jenkins shot to his feet. Victoria, is this true? Does she own that land outright? Of course not, she snapped, her composure slipping. This is a cheap ploy to squeeze more money out of our community fund. We've sunk millions into this already. Mrs. Patel raised a hand, her voice steady. I'd like to see the signed agreement. My husband, a real estate lawyer. He says jurisdiction needs clear consent. Victoria's mask cracked wide open. This meeting's about construction updates, not legal nitpicking, she barked. But I wasn't done. I pulled David's USB drive from my pocket, holding it up like a grenade. Then let's talk about the environmental study that skips over protected wetlands and endangered Willow Creek spotted frogs on my land's eastern edge. Victoria's eyes locked on the drive, then flicked to the back of the room. I followed her gaze. David stood there, quiet as a ghost. Her face went pale as death. This meeting's over, she shouted, slamming her gavel so hard I thought it'd splinter. But the damage was done. Neighbors swarmed me, grabbing the deed copies, firing questions. You mean they lied about the airport? Mr. Jenkins growled. What about our investments? Another voice cried. As the crowd thinned, Victoria cornered me by the exit, her voice a low hiss dripping with venom. You have no idea what you started, Emily. My husband has friends in every courthouse in this county. By tomorrow, your precious farm will be under eminent domain. Is that a threat? I asked, meeting her stare head-on. It's a promise, she spat. You can't win. She stormed off, leaving me with a chill that wasn't just from the night air. I drove home under a sky full of stars, but headlights in my rearview mirror killed any peace I might have felt. A black SUV tailed me, too close for comfort. When I turned onto my street, it gunned its engine, pulling alongside. The window rolled down, and I caught Gerald Brooks's face, twisted with rage. "Back off, Carter!" he yelled before the SUV peeled away. I pulled into my driveway, hands shaking, and found my front door wide open, lights blazing. No way I'd left it like that. Henry had set the alarm himself when we left the meeting, heart pounding. I called the cops and waited in my car until their flashing lights showed up. Officer Daniels poked around inside. "No one's here," he said, "but your papers are trashed and your computer's smashed." Henry arrived, surveying the mess. "They're trying to scare you." "It's working," I admitted. Laura, picking up torn documents, added, "Or they're desperate. We need to stash these files somewhere safe." As we gathered the scattered papers, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello," I said, voice shaky. "Ms. Carter," a smooth male voice replied. "This is Richard Langston, Victoria's husband. You've caused quite a stir. Let's meet tomorrow. Breakfast at the Willow Creek Country Club. 9 a.m. Bring the USB drive. It's your ticket in." The line went dead before I could answer. I looked at Henry and Laura, their faces mirroring my dread. "What now?" I asked. Laura's jaw tightened. "We copy everything tonight and call every news outlet in the state." Henry nodded. "Tomorrow, we turn Richard's trap into ours. He doesn't know who he's invited to the table." The night wasn't over, and neither was a fight. Victoria and Richard thought they could bully me into submission, but they just lit a fire I wasn't about to let die. Victoria's venomous promise still echoed in my head as I drove away from the community center. "By tomorrow, your precious farm will be under eminent domain." I'd just thrown a Molotov cocktail into her perfect little scheme, and she wasn't going down quietly. The night sky glittered with stars, but my rearview mirror told a different story. Those headlights, too close, too steady. That black SUV stuck to me like a shadow until I hit my street, then roared up beside me. Gerald Brooks's snarling face flashed in the window. "Back off, Carter!" he bellowed before they sped off. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was personal. I pulled into my driveway, adrenaline buzzing, and froze. My front door gaped open, lights blazing inside like a beacon. No chance I'd left it that way. Henry had locked up tight when we headed to the meeting. Heart hammering, I stayed in my car and dialed 911. "Someone's been in my house," I told the dispatcher, voice trembling. The wait for the cops felt like forever. But finally, Officer Daniels rolled up, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He poked around inside and came back shrugging. "No intruders now," he said. "But your place is a mess. Papers everywhere. Computer screens smashed to bits." I stepped in and saw it. Uncle James's files scattered like confetti, my laptop a crumpled wreck. "They're trying to scare you," Henry said when he arrived, his voice grim as he surveyed the damage. "Or they're desperate," Laura added, picking up a torn survey map. "We need to secure these files somewhere safe tonight." We gathered what we could, my hands still shaky when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Ms. Carter," a voice purred, smooth and cold as ice. "This is Richard Langston, Victoria's husband. I understand you stirred up quite a storm tonight." My blood ran cold. The man behind the curtain was calling me? "Mr. Langston, no need to explain," he cut in. "I'd like to meet tomorrow. Breakfast at the Willow Creek Country Club. 9 a.m. Bring that USB drive. It's your ticket of admission." The line clicked dead before I could respond. I stared at Henry and Laura, their faces tight with the same fear clawing at me. "What do I do?" I asked, feeling the walls closing in. Laura's eyes hardened. "We make copies of everything, right now. Then we call every news outlet in the state." Henry nodded, his judge's calm kicking in. "Richard just invited the fox into his henhouse, but he doesn't know you're bringing friends. Tomorrow, we spring our trap." We spent the next hour scanning documents, James's deed, David's emails, the whole damning pile, uploading them to a cloud drive and emailing backups to Laura's office. By 2 a.m., we'd pitched the story to 3 local stations. hinting at corruption big enough to make headlines. Exhausted, I crashed on my couch, the broken window letting in a cold breeze that matched the chill in my bones. Morning came too fast, but not before the Langstons upped the ante. I woke to a text from David. Old mill. Now. New info. Critical. I grabbed my keys and drove, the mill's sagging silhouette looming against a gray dawn. Was this another setup? I pushed open a heavy door, dust swirling like ghosts. David. A tall guy with wire-rimmed glasses stepped from the shadows, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. Ms. Carter, I worked for Victoria until last week, he said, voice low. They're moving faster than I thought. He handed me a coffee-stained folder, blueprints, emails, bank statements. My stomach dropped as I flipped through. This isn't a regional airport, I whispered. These are cargo facilities. David nodded, jittery. Richard owns Apex Shipping. They need a private terminal for overseas deals. The public airport is a smokescreen. I pointed to a map. This runway slices through James's Pond. That's why they're obsessed with my land. Exactly, he said, glancing at his watch. The geography's perfect, but there's more. He showed me an email on his phone. Their biggest competitor's building a hub 50 miles away. Whoever finishes first gets a fat government contract. That's why they're rushing. I snapped photos of it all, mind racing. Why, help me, David. His face darkened. Victoria fired me after a decade. Said I wasn't a team player when I flagged the environment report. Then she made sure no one in town would hire me. This is my shot to hit back. The mill door banged open and we both jumped. Tom Riley stood there, clipboard in hand. David, your car's outside. What's going on? David fumbled, just grabbing old records. Tom's eyes flicked to me, suspicious. Victoria's called an emergency HOA meeting tonight. You should both be there. He left and David whispered, they're spooked. Be ready. I drove home, the folder heavy in my lap, and found Henry and Laura waiting. What did he give you? Henry asked. I spread the papers out. Proof it's a cargo hub, not an airport. And they're racing a competitor. Laura's eyes lit up. This strengthens our injunction. Fraud on top of no jurisdiction. But the Langstons weren't waiting for us to strike. By afternoon, my water shut off, some emergency pipeline maintenance that only hit my house. A parking cop towed my car from my own driveway, citing a new restricted zone that didn't exist yesterday. Code violation notices started piling up in my mailbox, daily. They're trying to break you, Henry said over coffee at his place. The only spot that felt safe. Make your life hell until you cave. It's working, I admitted, exhaustion seeping in. I can't even shower. Laura spread out our legal docs. The judge gave them a hearing Friday. Richard's got pull everywhere. We need more ammo. Then David texted again. Meet me? Critical update. We met at a busy downtown coffee shop, his eyes sunken with stress. I hacked Victoria's private emails, he whispered, sliding over another USB. She lied to the FAA about your wetlands, called them seasonal drainage. They're permanent. Home to protected frogs. Laura plugged it into her laptop, grinning. This is gold. The Willow Creek spotted frogs federally protected. We can stop them cold. They're draining it Saturday, David added. Pumps are ordered when offices are closed. The clock was ticking, and Richard's breakfast invite loomed. Whatever he had planned, I'd be walking into the lion's den. But now, I had claws of my own. The coffee shop buzzed around us as David slid that USB across the table, his warning about the wetland draining hanging heavy. Saturday morning, he'd said, when no one can stop them. Laura's eyes gleamed as she scanned the falsified FAA emails. This is our kill shot, she whispered. The Willow Creek spotted frog protected. Draining that pond is a federal crime. I nodded, but my stomach churned. Richard Langston's breakfast invite was hours away, and after last night's break-in, I didn't trust his generous settlement one bit. We've got to file before they move, I said. Laura agreed. Emergency injunction, Friday afternoon. Let's go. We piled into her car, the USB and James's deed tucked in her briefcase. The country road to the courthouse stretched quiet and empty until a black SUV roared into my rearview mirror. "They're back," I muttered, pulse spiking. The SUV closed in fast, then swerved alongside us. Laura cursed, yanking the wheel as they tried to run us off. We skidded onto the shoulder, gravel flying, my head slamming against the window. The SUV screeched to a halt, blocking us in. Two men in dark suits stepped out, one tapping my window with a knuckle. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice flat. "Mr. Langston wants to discuss a deal. Get in. Now." I whispered to Laura, "Drive?" She floored in reverse, tires screaming as we peeled down a dirt side road. The men scrambled back to their SUV, but we lost them in the dust. "That was Victor Langston, security chief," Laura panted, her lawyer cool cracking. "Richard's not playing anymore." My phone lit up, notifications flooding in. Someone had doxed me online, posting my address with lies about me blocking vital jobs for Willow Creek. Angry messages poured in from strangers. "They're turning the town against me," I said, nausea rising. Laura scrolled the posts. "Intimidation 101. We're hitting them where it hurts." We pulled over, catching our breath, when a soft tap on my window made me jump. Mr. Jenkins, my grumpy mailbox critic, peered in. "Saw Watson's goons chasing you," he said gruffly. "You okay?" I nodded, stunned. "Why help me?" Back at my house, the answer waited on my porch, a crowd of neighbors I barely knew. Jenkins, Mrs. Patel, the Garcias from down the street, a dozen others. "We saw the highway stunt," Jenkins explained. "Victoria's cross a line." Mrs. Patel twisted her hands. "My brother's with county clerk. They're holding a secret session tonight to ram through eminent domain." "Why me?" I asked. "I thought you all wanted this airport." Mrs. Garcia shook her head. "They sold us a small regional hub, jobs, not a cargo monster shaking our homes." Mr. Patel added, "My cousin's in construction. Says they're planning a fuel depot by the school playground." I invited them in, and my dining room turned into a war room. The Garcias, who ran the local print shop, offered to make flyers. Jenkins, shockingly tech-savvy, launched a community page that exploded with followers. Mrs. Patel's church group planned a prayer vigil outside the county building. Code for a protest with hymns. Laura pored over the eminent domain papers. Mr. Patel's brother had smuggled. "Missing signatures," she said, and the wetland assessments predated. Sloppy. By dawn, our plan was rolling. Flyers hit every doorstep in Oakwood Estates. The Garcia kids' banner screaming save our wetlands from corporate greed. Henry called in old judge favors, landing us news interviews. I stepped in front of the cameras, nerves jangling, but the words came easy. "This isn't just my farm," I said. "It's about powerful people breaking rules we all have to follow." By noon, the story was viral, and the county commissioner called Laura, sweating. "He's concerned about irregularities," she whispered. "They're wobbling." Then a black Mercedes purred into my driveway. Victoria stepped out, makeup flawless but eyes shadowed. "Name your price," she snapped, skipping pleasantries. "Everyone's got one." "I don't want money." I shot back, arms crossed. "I want my farm and your resignation." She laughed, bitter and brittle. "You don't know who you're up against." Henry strolled up, waving a thick envelope. "Your husband's just been served federal subpoenas. EPA and FAA love those fake reports." Victoria's face drained of color. "This isn't over," she hissed, retreating to her car. That night, David called, voice urgent. "They're moving equipment to the wetlands now, draining it before the injunction. If those frogs go, your case weakens." I looked around my living room. Neighbors who'd once fined me for my mailbox now ready to fight. "We got to stop them," I said. "Who's in?" Every hand shot up. Headlights pierced the dark as our caravan rumbled toward the farm. The Langstons thought they'd crush me, but they'd just woken a sleeping giant. Our caravan bumped down the muddy farm road, headlights slicing through the night. David's warning rang in my ears. "Drain the wetlands, kill the frogs. Kill my case." Zoe gripped the passenger seat, peering ahead. Look, floodlights blaze over the marshy eastern edge. Workers invest positioning massive pumps. A bulldozer growled nearby. I slammed the brakes and leapt out, mud sucking at my shoes. Stop, I yelled, charging toward a worker. This is protected habitat. Tom Riley stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Ms. Carter, I've got orders. Leave or I call security. Call whoever. Jenkins barked as neighbors spilled from their cars. We've already got the state EPA and Channel 7 coming. Mrs. Garcia waved her phone. On their way. I faced Tom. You know, draining this breaks federal law. Endangered frogs live here. We're all witnesses. Mrs. Patel and her church crew stepped up. We're not leaving, she said softly. We'll chain ourselves if we have to. And they did. Neighbors who bickered over my lawn linked arms around the wetland. Mr. Patel stood with Jenkins, united despite past fence feuds. Tom radioed someone, voice tight. Turn off the pumps, Henry ordered, his judge's authority cutting through. One worker hesitated, then hit the switch. Silence fell. You'll regret this, Tom warned, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Police lights flashed in the distance. Then state EPA officers rolled up, news van on their heels. The officers started sampling water, snapping photos, while a reporter shoved a mic in my face. Ms. Carter, why are you out here at 1 a.m.? Before I could answer, a black Escalade screeched in. Victoria and Richard Langston stormed out. Fury etched on their faces. What is this? Richard roared. I paid for those permits. Bribed, you mean? Henry shouted, loud enough for the mic. EPA's got your emails now. Victoria lunged at me, finger jabbing. You stubborn fool, what have you cost us? About what you tried to cost me. I said, steady. My home, my land, my peace. Over the next hours, officials swarmed, county inspectors, wildlife experts, even FBI agents sniffing interstate fraud. The EPA confirmed dozens of Willow Creek spotted frogs, taping off the area with protected habitat signs. The Langstons watched from their car, pale as their cargo hub dream crumbled. By noon, my house water was off again, another emergency fix. Then my car got towed from my driveway, a new zone violation. Notices piled up, trash uncollected, internet spotty. They're breaking you down, Henry said at his kitchen table. Make you give up. It's working. I groaned, filthy and frayed. Laura spread out papers. Friday's hearing's key. We need more. David met us later, haggard, with wetland photos mislabeled as drainage. They're pumping Saturday, he said. We file tomorrow, Laura vowed. The community stand had bought us time, but the Langstons weren't done fighting dirty. Friday hit like a freight train. Laura and I filed the injunction. The wetland photos and David's emails are ace. That afternoon, Victoria pulled into my driveway, offering cash I didn't take. Henry's subpoena bomb sent her running. But that night, David's call jolted us awake. They're draining now, before the injunction sticks. We rallied the crew, Jenkins, Patel, Garcias, all in. Our cars tore down the farm road, mud flying. Floodlights glared ahead, pumps humming, bulldozer idling. I ran forward, shouting, Stop! This is illegal! Tom Riley faced me. Orders, Ms. Carter. Back off. Jenkins yelled, State's coming. Mrs. Garcia added, News, too. I pointed at the pumps. Those frogs are protected. You're on camera. Mrs. Patel's group formed a human chain, a quiet wall of defiance. Tom hesitated. Then a worker killed the pumps. Silence rang out. Sirens wailed. EPA officers, news crew, then the Langstons' Escalade. Richard stormed over. I paid for this. Henry grinned. Bribe, you mean? Feds are listening. Victoria glared at me. You've ruined us. You tried to ruin me, I said. Officials took over. Frogs confirmed. Area sealed. The Langstons' empire teetered as fraud probes deepened. The community had held the line, and the wetland stood firm. Weeks later, the dust settled, literally. Jenkins uncovered the airport was a rezoning scam for a mall, impossible to build as planned. The Langstons fled amid investigations. The HOA board revamped under Jenkins and Mrs. Garcia. I stood on my farm, watching neighbors plant a community garden. Jenkins's idea to share the land while saving the wetland. Mrs. Patel handed me lemonade, smiling. Tomatoes are thriving. Who would have thought? I laughed. You wanted me fine over my mailbox once. Crises show what matters, she said. Henry joined us. Cane tapping. What's next for the land? I looked at the kids playing near the frog-filled wetland. Neighbors who'd once nitpicked now laughing together. James said good fences make good neighbors. I mused. He was wrong. Good neighbors don't need them. The frogs croaked, safe in their home. A tiny detail that saved us all.